So, I'm going to talk a little bit about anger and cut off emotions. When we cut off emotions when we're younger because they weren't acceptable, when we feel them as an adult, we feel guilt, we feel shame, we feel remorse, we feel worthless, we feel helpless. When I was a kid and I got angry and I expressed that anger came back to me 10 times as much. I learned really early on that I wasn't allowed to have, feel, express anger. So I cut it off and buried it. Of course, this is unconscious. You're a child. Your emotional capability for sorting out your feelings and emotions are just not there at that age. So I learned how to be a nice guy, people pleaser, because I couldn't handle other people's anger. And that really starts to limit you as a human being. It limits the places you're going to go, the people you interact with, the things you're going to do, what you're going to say, how you're going to say it. You're always watching yourself from behind. You're always on guard, making sure that you don't say or do anything to anger anybody. Because as a child, you couldn't handle those emotions. And as an adult, we still haven't processed through that. So for me, I detached completely from my anger. And when I feel anger, I feel shame and humiliation in a way that I can't even express. There's just this powerlessness, this helplessness that comes over me. I was taught that if I upset or angered somebody, that they had every right to trample over me, my body, my emotions, my feelings, and just use and abuse me. And I had no recourse because standing up to it made the abuse worse. So as we get older, we get into relationships and or jobs or bosses or friendships, and somebody expresses anger and we just freeze and sink so low into ourselves that we just become that helpless victim that we remember as a child. Asking somebody not to get angry at you is the same thing as somebody abusing you and not letting you have your anger. You're taking away their emotional responses that are natural to them, whether it's a healthy anger response or an unhealthy anger response. So the work is up to us to do it. And how do we get more comfortable with people's anger? We have to become more comfortable with our own anger. See, mine's cut off so far that it's so hard for me to access it. You can just walk all over me for days, weeks, and months, and I just keep smiling through it until this one day where I just can't store any more anger or resentment. And then I blow up and I let out my anger in a very unhealthy way. See, if I could learn how to express my anger as as I feel I'm getting trampled on or disrespected, letting it out a little over time. I don't have to store it up and explode it, but I didn't know how to do that. It's because I didn't realize that I wasn't in touch with my anger. And it's so hard to get to that because the feelings that come up when you start to get into your anger, it's very confusing. There's just feelings of abandonment as well because when I was angry, I was abused and abandoned. So that is imprinted in me on every single possible level, my brain, my being, my soul, my cells. And it's hard to undo that. And I can't think my way out of it. I have to feel my way through it. And the only way to do that is to start getting in touch with your anger. But we can't go right to the bottom of it. We can't just get to the core of that anger. We have to start with feeling the uncomfortable feelings of having the anger. A good way to start is with boundaries. So people who aren't allowed to have their anger have shitty boundaries. Like my boundaries were horrible. I didn't have any. You were allowed to just kind of come into my emotional house, trash the shit out of it, and leave. And I had to smile and clean it up. I had to learn how to set boundaries and not allow people to come in and just trash me emotionally. So, starting to set boundaries is a good way of dealing with the uncomfortable feelings. So, if we feel like we're being disrespected, somebody's coming too close emotionally where we don't feel comfortable, instead of allowing them in and holding that anger and that resentment, just being pissed off and just seething inside, and then going home and trying to self-soothe through that, it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work. It was a coping mechanism back when you were younger, but now there's a point where we have to start to set boundaries and let people know that it's not okay to cross this line. It's not okay to treat us in this way. They may not think there's anything wrong with it, but that doesn't matter. If it doesn't feel right for you, you have a right to open up and to say something. So when you first start setting boundaries, you're going to feel ridiculously uncomfortable. It just feels wrong because, as people with trauma and who are very empathetic, we don't like to put the feelings that we are uncomfortable with on other people. When we set boundaries, we're going to make people feel uncomfortable, which makes us feel uncomfortable. It triggers our shame and our abandonment and our humiliation and our abuse and all of that. So instead of having to go straight to the core of your anger, starting to set small boundaries and dealing with the difficult feelings that come up is a way to start training our emotions and our brain and our body that we can handle people not looking at us in this perfect light that we need to be seen in. See, I need to be seen as perfect. So part of my recovery is doing things that aren't perfect and dealing with how painfully uncomfortable that is. So when you start to set boundaries, when you feel anger, that's a good place to start, and you will start to get used to it, and your boundaries will get stronger and they will become easier to set. And you will have this foundation of this is okay and acceptable, and this is not. And you're going to start to know it instinctively, so that we get to the point where we don't have to store up all of these resentments and just have this big blow up. We're actually setting boundaries as we go along. And by setting that boundary, we are not holding on the resentment. And we're not telling somebody that they're awful human beings. We're just saying, listen, that doesn't feel comfortable to me. And I don't really want you to be doing that anymore. And I need you to respect that. And over time, if they can't respect that, then you're going to have to make a choice and either set a really hard boundary, or you're going to have to leave whatever that relationship is. I mean, it would be great if I can get everybody in the world to just agree to like me and not be angry with me, but I don't think that's realistic. So I have to do the work, and the work sucks. It's hard. It's painful. It's difficult. It's that emotional body reaction. So I'm setting a boundary in the present, but my body is reacting from decades ago of something that had happened over and over that I've never resolved. So the good way to do that is to start off slow. And we're not going to do this right every time. It is going to be difficult. And I've set boundaries, and then I went and obsessed about it for days. And, am I still okay with this person? Are they looking at me differently? Did I upset them? I'm a horrible person for standing up for myself. Like all of those negative internal voices and dialogue that runs in the background, that's the stuff that we start to connect with as we set the boundaries. So by setting boundaries, we're not storing up the anger. We're putting a stop to people trespassing where we don't want them to trespass, to hold off of that anger, to deal with those feelings. And the boundaries will get better. They will get stronger. They will get easier to implement. And as we do that, we start to realize what does make us angry when we set boundaries. And then we don't have to go into like this explosive rage after 9 months of people crossing it. Other anger work is actually realizing what had happened and being angry about it, instead of being in that helpless victim role where we feel like we deserved it. Um, and the hating of ourselves for not being strong enough to get out of it at the time. We're thinking of stuff as an adult. We have to start putting ourselves in that child's position and what that child endured and what that child was up against. A 42-year-old man or woman, it looks like a giant to a 7-year-old boy or girl. And there's no possible way you could have stood up and set boundaries. So you just had to accept, and that conditioning stays with us. We have to start changing that conditioning, start setting boundaries. And the more boundaries we set, the more safe and secure we feel within ourselves, the less we are going to fear other people's anger. All right. Hope everybody's having a great day. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.